It's time for some Type 40, a little extra Type 40 for you here on the Spacebook channel with me, Dan Hadley, Birmingham's king of the geeks, and yes, some real-time travelling for us. We are broadcasting to you from the past. Clever, aren't we? The not-too-distant past, just a few days ago. And when I say we, yes, it's not just me. For this bumper edition, this bumper Type 40 extra, I bring with me some of YouTube's finest and the biggest mouths in the Doctor Who community and some of the most artistic souls. I'm going to bring them on right away. You'll almost certainly know them if you're familiar with YouTube. In particular, he's one of the most productive and certainly one of the loudest of Doctor Who community voices here on YouTube. It's the Rabbi from another planet, Tzvi Lebetkin.
Hello, how are you?
Hello, mate. Good to see you. How are things?
It's good to be seen. Let me tell you, I like a bit of scenage. How are you?
Say a bit like the TARDIS console, up and down, up and down. Yes,
up
I'm
and
good.
down, up and down, mate. No, mate. Just up, baby, just up. Which reminds me of my fan fiction, Perry and the Time Rotor of Love. But the less said about that, the better.
I think you could be right. Did you see the picture that we put up the other day in the Type 40?
I did. On my video tomorrow, I end on that, right? I do. Fantastic cosplay. The best cosplay I've ever seen. Wonderful ladies, all of them.
Yes, I wish we could track them down. If you are watching, ladies out there, the two Perrys who were flanking Colin Baker there at Gallifrey 1 this year, get in touch, let us know who you are, and we'll get you on the show. But when we talk about The Only Way Is Up, it makes me think of that record from the 80s that by Yaz, but that's a different kind of Yaz than the Yaz that we're used to talking about now. Oh, it's so confusing. Maybe this man, because he's a musician, maybe he can make some sense of it. Yeah, this is all-round creative force of nature, I think you could call him. This is Hadley, problem being.
The only way is up, baby. Hello.
Yeah, it's not quite the same unless you drop the baby at the end of it, is it?
No, you got to have the baby.
No, it isn't. Okay, yes, I've asked you two guys here in particular because you are all-round creatives. I mean, Rabbi, yourself as an artist, writer, publisher, as well as a YouTuber, and Lee, you're a musician, artist, editor, voice artist, actor, all this stuff, and both obviously lifelong major Doctor Who fans. I thought we could get together and we talk to our other guest about this fascinating project that he's been working on, certainly for the last few months, because Lee, you certainly are the one who pointed me in the direction of his work. So how did you find it? It comes from a Twitter account called Atom Mirabilis,
I believe.
Mirabilis. So there we are. So how did you find this guy?
Well, it's just one of those things that we usually happenstance across on, YouTube and in our community. People turn up and it turns out that they have inexhaustible supplies of talent. And I think that's something, regardless of really whether or not you're a fan of the current era or not, there is a lot of creativity within this fandom.
Cool.
And he just happened to be one that popped up in, I believe, from what I recall, from appearing in the chat for Noel's TARDIS Zone channel, and sort of following him on Twitter and finding out that he was doing these incredible, meticulously created drawings, very technical drawings of TARDIS consoles,
of everything, of absolutely
characters, everything. And really delving into the lore.
Cool. They're insanely cool.
And and then it was seeing all this, and then I remember in the chat it was like, why aren't you trading off this? And I actually suggested that you should do those sort of top trump cards. You didn't know what they were, so I was like trying to explain pop trumps. And I said, I'll only take 10% on that.
Rabbi, Doctor Who and the Doctor Who community, we've been known as being so fiercely creative now, haven't we, for practically the 60 years that Doctor Who's been in existence. But you could argue that one thing that hasn't been Doctor Who's strongest suit over the years has been visual consistency. Now, you could say that's overrated, and But at the end of the day, I suppose what some of us may find frustrating, depending on how anally retentive we are, how meticulous we are, others may see as an opportunity to or a thrown down gauntlet almost to make some sort of sense of it all.
That is a question.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think consistency. I'm not quite sure what you mean by that, but
visual consistency in how the show has looked. And
well, I
its
think
its mythology.
It's always regenerating. You know, I mean, a lot of claims are made that the show is all about change. I disagree with that. I think the show has a consistency to it. I think the change element is part and parcel of keeping it fresh, but it still has a thread that follows through it. You know, you can't fundamentally change the whole show and still call it Doctor Who. But
well, they did that.
You have
in all
changed.
fairness.
They did, and it didn't work.
Everything about it, right? Everything about it, and
Absolutely.
then if you mentioned it, you got in trouble.
But I think if you're so inclined and really, really creative, and if you've got enough affection in your heart, you can follow those sort of the breadcrumbs and even the lines through certainly the 26 years of the classic run when consistency was even less of a watchword because they didn't know that people would be watching these things over and over again and picking through them and trying to make it all fit. You know, I think if you're so minded, you can follow those breadcrumbs and try and sort of piece it all together. And I suppose part of the USP of Doctor Who, with these stories being sort of wildly differing across time periods, you could also seize that as well. We're going to find out now when we bring in the man behind Atom
Mirabilis.
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 It's easy for you to say. The man behind Atom Mirabilis, it's our mate, Adam. Hello,
Hello.
Adam.
Hello,
Welcome
YouTube.
to Type 40. Welcome to YouTube.
It's nice to be back. It's been probably about 7 months, I think, since I've been on a live stream or a YouTube stream. Last time I was on was with Noel. Yeah, that was about 7 months ago. Though I feel like I've seen all of you guys because I watch regularly, even during the week when I'm working. So, you know, I tend to see you all on a daily basis, especially Rabbi. I see him on a daily basis.
The correct answer.
My lunch hour, I'll come into a live stream every now and then. Sometimes I can only watch and not interact. But
you probably see more of him than his missus does. So it's all done, isn't it? Everything that we do, I think all four of us really, is done for the love of Doctor Who. But where you're coming from is specifically in a visual way. I mean, the kind of material that you've been putting out onto Twitter in particular. I would say that for all that Twitter is a frustrating place to be, and sometimes quite a nasty and home to some of the most violent and abusive of people, it's also a really fiercely creative place too. That's why I think that's why the Doctor Who community is so active on there. And you started to publish, I suppose, didn't you, snippets of work of a project that you seem to have been working on for some time. And it's a set of 2 books, ebooks, is it? So what's the starting point for this? And where did the idea come from?
Well, actually, would I have to go back a little bit further? So I started with my Doctor Who art, trying to figure out the TARDIS. That was kind of my passion as a child. At 10, I came up with a name for the TARDIS because at the time Doctor Who was only on PBS in the US. I was actually born in the UK. I was born in Lakenheath, which is in the county of Brandon, which is northeast of London. My parents were Air Force, so I've got a British birth certificate. I've always had an affinity for the show because of that, those roots. But really, I would say I probably started putting my stuff out on the internet back in 2008. I used to be a very active member of Trek BBS. It was a website message board for all Star Trek. And the reason why I went there and posted my art there was because I felt that the other people that were posting their schematics of all different kinds of Trek ships would appreciate the artwork that I was trying to do, because I wanted to mirror that specific look. And the problem was at the time, the only book we had for Doctor Who for schematics and designs of the ships and stuff was that 1970 or 1980s book that was based on the Fourth Doctor. Yes.
Oh, I think I got that. Now, let me go look for it.
Yeah. I mean, the one that I'm thinking of specifically was the Doctor Who Technical Manual by Mark Harris that I think was published around 82, 83. And I know one of the things that I've always admired about the Star Trek world, I mean, you could say one of the frustrations of Star Trek is the fact that it's all so uniform and it's all quite rigid. Of course, Starfleet, the nature of Starfleet being as it is. But you're right. I mean, that led to a library full of schematic publications, didn't it? Not just of the blueprints of the ships, but of uniforms and technology of tricorders and whatever. And yet nothing like that had been done for Doctor Who until this technical manual came out in the early 80s. And it was quite a slim book too, wasn't it, Adam?
Oh, yes. Very slim. I mean, it left you wanting a lot more. It did. It really did.
I remember that toolkit in there. There was that, you hardly ever saw it on the TV, and it was like, really? It was like a box. Remember, it was like 2 pages on that.
Yeah, and yet you hardly ever saw these items. They tended to be like on the TARDIS floor or something like that for 20 seconds, maybe.
Yeah. And well, they kind of did what they did with Star Trek. I mean, Star Wars, you know, you saw one character or a weapon on that character, and they released it in like the old Star Wars card game. So this was kind of, they pulled some obscure items that, but were really interesting. I mean, because we'd never seen the TARDIS toolkit before. I mean, I always thought that was a novel and amazing, you know, thing to put in this book. That actually, and the console. I mean, you see that there. I mean, it just, it really got the imagination flowing and the creative process in me. I mean, I wanted to see more. And 20 years, they never really released more. You know? Most of this came out of the wilderness years for me. A lot of that passion to do all this because we didn't have anything.
Yeah, there was a lot of filling that space, wasn't there, back then? Because there was nothing, so we had to create to keep it alive. And I don't think people today really fully understand that because they've never had to experience having been in love with something that you grew up with, and then it's taken away from you, and you still have that passion and nowhere really to put it other than to create your own things. This is how Big Finish came about. This is how people kept the show going in people's memories, and this is why it, I think, was key to it coming back in 2005.
And I suppose, Lee, that we've got books like visual dictionaries and visual guides, which feature characters, don't they, in full costume, often photography, more often than not. And those books are fine, aren't they, by places like DK, Dorling Kindersley, and all these very sort of officially approved and authorized photography that mostly we see over and over again. Now and again, on maybe 3 or 4 pages in a book like that, you get something really, really creative, but mostly it's very, very corporate, and it can be quite dry, can't it?
Yeah, I think because you have a kind of limited audience when the show isn't on TV, and so the license is sort of spread out to, you know, people like Virgin and so on and so forth, who are, you know, massive corporations. And it has, obviously, it's an intellectual property that does have bearing, it does have following, it does have a brand. It's institutionalized. You know, Doctor Who, you know, a lot of people don't really fully, I don't think, understand how ingrained it is within our DNA. And so corporations will always sort of take advantage of that, I think. And yeah, I think I think, though, having said that, I think there is an element of the Doctor Who fandom that obviously worked within those corporate structures in order to bring us more content. And I think as well that also led to a sort of clique within Doctor Who as well, which sort of curated where it was going in the future. And I think
now you've said that, the most interesting books and creative books did come out in the 90s, didn't they, when the show wasn't on?
Yeah, I think so. You know, I mean, obviously the Target novelizations were the precursor to that. but obviously those were based on stories that many people had watched. And then obviously with the advent of VHS, people were able to watch the shows that they couldn't see on TV anymore. And maybe the books sort of fell to one side, the target books, you know, based on the actual episodes that were aired. But so when sort of Virgin and companies like that produced new novels, obviously there was a market for that. But again, it's a sort of very limited pool, because obviously that pool is tapped in from the talent that was probably at the forefront of organizations like DRAS and Phoenix and places like that, where people were sort of the top dogs, if you like, within fandom to get somewhere and to keep it going. And hats off to them for doing that. But I think as well, it was quite a niche group, and certainly steered it in particular directions. But you know, having said that, we've got, thanks to Russell T Davies, who was probably, you know, more than likely just another element of that, and obviously Nicholas Briggs as well, who kept it going and sort of molded it in their own vision, in their own
and
way.
made it global as well, giving it that global reach. And with the rise of the internet, meaning that people like Adam can find the rest
PBS
of us, we can
as well
all find
in
one
America.
another. But with as you said, Adam sort of coming out of YouTube, out of comment sections, engaging with people. They say, well, actually, I've been working on a project or whatever. So this is your project, isn't it, Adam? And it's very much geared, I think, from that same place as the technical manual, but has a deeper remit. So this is the Time Lord Handbook and the Time Lord Compendium, 2 titles that you've been working on. So to go from just putting together the odd visual to deciding to create basically 2 entire books, this was a big leap. Did the projects gradually come together, or was this always the big ambition for you?
Well, starting out, actually, I just wanted to do one book, really, and it was going to be it was going to be basically like Mr. Scott's Guide to the Enterprise, but it was more of a master schematic.
Like this thing, right?
Yeah, yeah, very similar to that.
There you go. Yeah, I'll do the inside. That's it. 1 second.
And it was just all TARDIS stuff.
That's a big book as well, isn't it, Rabbi?
Probably twice as thick as the.
No illustrations.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Exactly. And explaining the mechanics.
That's 4 or 5 times the size of the technical manual, as you just said, Lee.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, but half as many pictures. See, doesn't make sense to me. Anyway.
Go on. So what had you seen in that then, Adam, and you made you think, that would work for Doctor Who?
Well, so that was for the TARDIS. That's where I started. But as I started to go along, I really got more into the lore, because I can't take all the credit for all the research that's been done. That was actually done by a friend of mine, William Swift. He is actually the writer on the Whooniverse website. If you ever go there and check it out.
Is that the same website? Because I remember back in the 2000s, I remember a very sort of basic, sort of typical 90s website, you know, with a black background and very brightly colored text, you know, and it would tell you. I mean, I remember reading so much about the lore of the great vampires and all this kind of stuff. And is that the guy who ran? I don't know if it's the same person who ran that website.
Absolutely. Absolutely, that's the exact website you're talking. Yeah, and all the different colors of the text were color coded, so to where he got the information, whether it was from a novel, the TV. I mean, it's fantastic. He's been helping me with the TARDIS book, and that's kind of where we were. But he's also been kind of giving me some help on the Time Lord Compendium and then the Time Lord Handbook. Now, where those 2 books came from was out of the technical manual. I was looking at the 1978 Starfleet technical book that they released. It was from the 1970s, had the old school classic TOS Enterprise in it, schematics of different versions of that ship. The old school tricorder Starfleet base, all that was in there. So the Time Lord Compendium is effectively the Doctor Who version of that book. The Time Lord Handbook is a pun and kind of a based on the old comic book Who's that you used to see, where you had the
Oh yeah,
superhero.
DC and Marvel both did those, didn't they?
Correct.
In one form or another.
Yes, and I wanted to do a version of that, but with Time Lords, and it was just the Time Lords. All the notable ones that have been in the series, even obscure ones, I'll pull them out. Like I did one from who was only in a Doctor Who magazine comic, and it was like a 3-page insert story. It wasn't even really a comic. They had a few drawings of the character in it, and then that was about it. So I kind of added him in, and it's really going to be more.
I had wondered about this actually, Adam, because they're very reminiscent. These entries that we've got up on screen at the moment for the first 2 incarnations of the Doctor, they are clearly very much like Marvel Universe, aren't they? The original Marvel edition from the 80s.
Oh yeah, real name, occupation, history, all that. I thought that would be fun to put in there because those are the things as a kid that interest me, that got me closer to characters like Wolverine, Cyclops,
Yeah, me too.
Superman. They told a backstory and then they gave you an image of them. And it was just, you wanted to collect more and more issues to get more characters from the universe.
Because with comics mythology, unless you got into them sort of in the early 60s and you were there, you're always coming in halfway or less, like some way into their lifespan, aren't you? So you need to play catch up somehow. So that's how those comic books, that's how they sort of sold really on that virtue. I mean, because old comics then, there was no comicsology and reprints were few and far between. And I suppose you could say it was the same for Doctor Who before the VHS tapes came out, Rabbi.
Right. I mean, the only way you could really relive them is the Target novelizations, which is why they're so beloved. You know, from if you're a fan in the 70s before VHS, or before what's the one before VHS? Before not Betamax, it was Philips, I think, was before VHS. Then the only way you can relive it is in the Target novelization. But I used to love these things in the Marvel books, right? In the DC books. I used to love like these little glimpses into a deeper lore, which I knew there was a lot more of what I didn't know what it was. So but this is so much fun. I love these.
I love the. I mean, not only are the facial likenesses absolutely spot on, the costumes, the poses, they absolutely scream those characterizations. I think they're absolutely delightful. And look at Troughton's little sort of almost jig-like stance with his recorder, and the austerity of Hartnell there, of the sort of glint in his eye and almost a smile sort of peeking in. I love it, you know. And the colors are great as well. I think it's such a truly wonderful representation of these 2 classic Doctors. And I just love the fact that you've got this file, you know, compiled together with their story. You know, it's a wonderful thing. And I love the sort of yellowization, you know, the sort of yellowing of the page as well. So it gives it an age to it.
Oh, you caught that?
Yeah,
I was surprised. I was hoping people would. Have you seen the paper that's folded up in the pocket of the second Doctor?
I was going to ask about that because it's got the glyphs on it. So I've noticed this about several of the pages and illustrations that I've seen of your work. You've got these sort of little bits of connective visual tissue, either backwards or forwards through the series' visual lifespan. That's all deliberate.
It is. I wanted to tie the classic to the new series, and you never see the glyphs in the classic, of course, because it was a new thing. But I figured in this art, I might as well pop it in. It's just kind of a nod back to the new Who, tying it to the old Who, and it really, when somebody sees that and they're looking through, if they catch it, you know, visually, they'll be like, oh, you know, it just makes them feel more inclusive into the whole lore that the show's been on the air for, you know, more than 55
extra
years.
Stitching, isn't it, Adam? Extra stitching.
Yep, just a little extra connective tissue.
It's one thing to look at the characters from the TV show. That's what one would expect. But given the specific remit that we're looking at the Time Lords and Time Lord mythology and surrounding the series and the expanded universe, you've taken the same format and used it to adapt pretty much every version of well, particular characters such as Rassilon, for example. We've got this here. So this is the same idea taken through with Rassilon. So on the right, that's a version of the character as seen in the comic books, isn't it? As drawn by Dave Gibbons originally.
Correct. Yes. That was from the story Star Death, where Rassilon had obtained a directional device from a future assassin who was trying to stop the Time Lords from creating the Eye of Harmony, and ended up inadvertently causing the death or Omega's trap in the alternate universe. Now, that was in the comics, and they really didn't elaborate on that too much in the novels. I mean, they touched on some ideas, and then in the show, they never went into it. So this, to me, at the time, this was the lore. This was the history, because you could only get it in comics to fill in what you couldn't from the novels and the TV. And I always felt that Rassilon in the cloak like this, it had been throughout all of the 80s Doctor Who magazines. Every time you saw Rassilon, whether he was the Matrix Lord or it was a picture of him in the past, he was in that red hood and he had that belt, and that was about it. And you just knew he was like a wizard, but a technology wizard. Now,
that's
the one
what he always reminded me of, like the Wizard of Oz or something. But yeah, the one on the left, Rassilon the Vanquisher.
Mm-hmm.
That's also from a very specific time. I mean, I noticed that again, the staff that he's carrying there is Rassilon's staff that the Timothy Dalton incarnation uses in the Russell T Davies era, isn't it? But the rest of the illustration comes from something else entirely, doesn't it? From the 90s. Correct.
The Gallifrey Chronicles, they had an image of a Time Lord, and it wasn't specific. That wasn't specifically Rassilon. I think from the book that was. It's hard to pronounce the guy's name. Midicharasi, General Midicharasi, or something like that.
I can't remember. It's been so long since I read.
What book was that? I don't remember that.
Yeah,
it's the Gallifrey Chronicles from 1991.
I'll get that off my shelf. I do have that. Wait there.
Yep. Oh yes. I almost wanted to call him. Who is that Jewish rapper?
This is from that period of time. This is from that period of time that we were talking about earlier on. We were talking about the 1990s. The show was kind of out of sight, out of mind, and so books like this started to appear, which were able to go. Oh, the rabbi's got his copy there. We're able to go that bit deeper, and you could say it's what we could classify now as fan wank.
Yeah,
but it was.
But I mean, I think it's especially in the wilderness years. They're brilliant. Look at that.
There it is.
I think that's the wonderful thing about the wilderness years. It did give us much more creative license, I think, within the fandom to expound upon the lore of the show beyond what was seen in the show. And I think that it gave license to a lot of creativity. And I think it's almost, well, it's not almost a shame, but it is an absolute indictment of the current era of Doctor Who to sort of railroad that. And I think that's a very similar thing to what happened with the Star Wars extended universe when Disney took it over. And
both of them have just
I think it really shows,
haven't they?
Yeah, it seems
where they were.
It seems to have sucked the life out of the fandom. When you sort of corporatize,
they them out. It's like the Star Trek fan films.
Yeah.
Star Trek fan films will also stomp them out because they don't want any better competing with them. And that's really, I mean,
and quite honestly, a lot of it is so much better than the corporate entities can come up, because I don't really fully understand what they have. The fans intrinsically do. And yeah, of course, fans are always going to come up with sort of fan wanky stuff and nonsense. But, it's really using discernibility to sort of pick out things that actually add value to, to the lore of the show. And things like that do. And the things that Adam is doing really sort of hammers that home. It's not just his interpretation or his writers. What's his name? Sorry,
Bill Swift.
Bill Swift. It's not just that either, but it's a amalgam of all these wonderful elements that were introduced during the wilderness years that expounded upon the lore, and consolidating it and bringing it to the fore, reinvigorating what was experienced by many fans in the Doctor Who fandom during the wilderness years, and showing, well, this is what was happening between Survival and Rose. You know, this is where things were heading, and I think it's a wonderful celebration of what you two guys have done in bringing that to the fore and paying homage to the greater lore that has been sort of overwritten. Well, has been overwritten by lesser people, frankly.
Another thing I've noticed about this, Adam, is that you have, particularly in the illustration on the left there, I get the impression you're seeding different ideas too. So potential for further stories and for people who would read this book in whatever form to for further flights of the imagination. Like, why is one of his kneecaps gold and the other one silver, for example?
Correct. Yeah. So
maybe he had design influence from C3PO, you know.
Well, honestly, it was to kind of convey the fact that think of old classic Star Wars from the 70s, right? So the Time Lords are in this war, this expansive war that encompasses multiple galaxies. It's at the dawn of time. Their technology has just gotten to the level where they could call themselves Time Lords, right? So the armor is used and worn. And by the time that this, let's say somebody snapped a shot of Rassilon holding his staff, the one of his knees has been replaced. The armor has been replaced with silver as a backup. The gold would have been the standard, but it was replaced with silver on the other one because it was during the time that he was on the black hole carrier with the bow ships out commanding the operation and fighting the war. One of the things I wanted to
war against the vampires, wouldn't it? That's spoken about in State of Decay, and that's where this illustration comes in the book that the Rabbi's just been showing us, the Gallifrey Chronicle.
That's also where I got my design for the bow ships. It came from this.
Yeah, I wondered where you got that from, because I sort of envisioned them differently, but I wasn't aware of this comic book. But now I've seen it, I say, again, you know, you're not taking too much license with it. You're paying homage to things that have gone before and reinvigorating it and bringing it to a new audience and a fresh eye. And I love that. I think this is a real love letter to the wilderness years. Yeah, I love that.
Is this your first time seeing this?
That at the was it Trial Space Station?
Yeah, that's it.
Exactly.
Very cool.
Those are actually okay. Here's the thing. The novel describes what a black hole carrier is at the time of the Great Vampire War, but they don't tell you. You know, the connective tissue between what they say a black hole carrier is and the time station has never really been made officially. But what we did was we took the lore of what a black hole carrier was, and we're thinking, okay, this is going to be a carrier. It's not carrying the black hole, it's carrying the bow ships like a troop carrier. So we took the time station, which, you know, even in expanded lore, they've given it the name Zenobia, even though that was never mentioned in the Trial of the Time Lord. So there's a lot that's been added to it. But with this particular design, we figured this was the black hole carrier that they used. It has multiple defensive batteries around the ring of it. In the center, you have this large
gun turrets.
Gun turrets, yep, and hangars that are all intermixed.
Which I always thought back when this was first seen on screen. Well, the only time it was ever seen on screen in 1986. I always thought it was quite strange, as exciting as that scene was, as expensive as it was. It didn't seem like Time Lord technology that we'd ever seen before, and even now it sits uncomfortably. You know, the big numbers, for example, you know, in English numerals rather than in glyphs or anything like that. It looks
actually numerals were Arabic.
Were they? There you go.
Well, I would say, you know, but you could always interpret that as, you know, whoever beholds it will see it in whatever language.
Yeah, of course.
You know,
Right. Translation.
I was just thinking about the physics of a black hole carrier as well. You could always, like, I was watching Journey to the Center of the TARDIS the other week, and we see a depiction of the Eye of Harmony in the TARDIS, which we know is not to be true. And I thought about it, and I thought you could always sort of see it as a non-localized situation. So you can access it through the TARDIS. It's a sort of portal to where the Eye of Harmony is, and so it appears to be in the center of the TARDIS, but in fact it's not local to the TARDIS. So that's probably how you could do that with a black hole. You know, it's a black hole carrier. You have a non-localized event happening at the center of the machine.
Well, what would be my thought as well would be the fact that the shaft of light that we see the TARDIS trapped in at the start of the trial, it's to take it out of time. In the way that you've just described, it's a device, and there seem to be 3 or 4 of them dotted around that ring, Adam, the outer ring of the station. So maybe that taking a time capsule out of time wasn't the original purpose of those beams. It was actually to do something much more precise and spectacular, just something a lot larger.
Oh yes. Well, actually, so let me back up. Lee brought up something that has been a point of contention for all.
I think our imaginations are sort of running away with us as we're talking through this. Go on, carry on.
Well, so in Journey to the Center of the TARDIS, all right, there are 2 schools of thought. One is you're seeing the Eye of Harmony from Gallifrey, and it's like a portal, and the TARDIS is kind of accessing that. But that idea doesn't hold water when you add it to some other instances in the new show that have kind of and if you go back to the 1996 movie, the TARDIS has a mini copy of the Eye of Harmony. Now, it can be depleted, which is why he has to take the rift energy when Gallifrey is actually outside of the universe in its pocket dimension from the Time Lord. Of course, we didn't know that at the time. But yeah, from the movie, you see that he's accessing the Eye of Harmony from his TARDIS. Well, that Eye of Harmony is actually a mini copy of the Eye of Harmony. It still needs to be replenished with energy, whether from the vortex, from the prime eye, or from rift energy.
Is that,
and it's like a
is that explicit? Is that explicitly detailed? Because I don't remember that.
It's never been explicitly said one way or the other. That's the problem. We've decided to take it as they have a mini copy.
Yeah, I don't know, because I think if you want to be more, because I think that's a specifically literal thing, right? That's I think if you want to look at it in a more sort of abstract, timey-wimey, Time Lordy kind of way, I think it would be much more interesting for me personally. I'm not dismissing it. For me personally, I'd say it would be more in keeping with the mythos and the lore and the sort of modern day physics element, which I don't necessarily agree with myself, but anyway, that's another thing. That is a non-localized event, so it is like the same Eye of Harmony. It appears to be in the TARDIS because TARDIS can access it directly, and all TARDISes can access the Eye of Harmony in that way, and that's what powers them, is that it's connected via a non-local bridge that connects all of these TARDISes to it, and so it's in one place. But like the TARDIS is transcendental, so is the Eye of Harmony and access to it. So I think, I don't know, for me personally, I think that makes more interesting sense than, let's say, just having a copy. It just seems a bit of a cop out if you had it in terms of explaining it. I would personally think it would be more interesting if it was a non-locality physics timey-wimey thing. But that's just me.
Yeah, look, I totally hear what you're saying. But this is the great thing about headcanon and fandom, right? People come up with their own like, little ways of explaining stuff, and they just like accept it as that's the way it is. And then when you hear somebody else's take on it, you're like, well, that was kind of the fun thing about being in a bar at a convention in the 80s or the 90s. You know, you heard other people's take on stuff. I know I've always kind of looked at it more the way you have, Lee, but I love this too. You know, I think they're all kind of fun and interesting.
And this is what we used to argue about, and you know, and then
Right,
someone
exactly.
like Chibnall comes along and writes something so extraordinarily subpar that it's an embarrassment, because already fans have invented much better stories and a much thicker lore that actually, you know, really fills in all these gaps already, and we're sitting there just like the extended universe in Star Wars, and it's just completely being dismissed by someone who hasn't got the nous to actually come up with anything really compelling. And it's a contrivance that sort of cherry picks elements of fan lore and presents it in a really sort of mediocre and dull way. And it's just like, well, it's not dull. It shouldn't be dull. And it is. And
well,
it's
particularly
such a shame.
when everything that's already pre-existing points is a lot more magical.
Yeah, and the thing is as well, we've had 16 years of wilderness where people were filling in these gaps, and comic books were being written, and fan sites were being, you know, created, and things, you know, really cemented in the sort of psyche of the fans of the show, being keeping the show alive whilst it wasn't on air. For someone just to come along and create this really sort of paper thin facsimile of it, and rubbishing 16 years or more worth of lore, well established and concreted in many fans' minds, and be replaced with something not even remotely close to that.
Really quite disposable, and what you would call, Rabbi, more sort of a trash sci-fi level concepts and visuals.
Yeah,
whereas
I mean,
what Adam's fixated on here is not just how the TARDIS are powered, but how they look and why they look the way they look.
Yeah.
And looked at it in a technical way, I feel, Rabbi, but managed to channel some of that magic that Lee's just been talking about to create something that, you've got a blueprint for it, but it still looks...
Because I love the stuff where he shows the console and like that, what's going on around it. Do you have those pages here?
We've got all of that. So yeah, Adam. So that's your starting point. You've looked at the outer shell, haven't you? The time capsule shell that we see on screen in the not the Day of the Doctor, the night, not the Night of the Doctor. What's the episode? The name of the Doctor. So we see it on screen there. On screen there.
Yeah, but we kind of got this kind of like look before from like the Sidrat machines. You know, you had the idea that the Sidrats were kind of the same kind of like generic blank form. So I kind of like it fits into that 60s aesthetic. Big Finish did a play like just before that story came out, and they had a different design for the proto TARDIS, which was
it was a triangle, wasn't it? A pyramid, sorry. Like
and you had the ones from the War Games as well, didn't you? The capsules, which were square.
Oh right, yeah, exactly. That's the one.
And those are the ones we originally thought were going to be the. So okay, Lee, let me back up. There are two things that I want to mention. Okay, in one of the visual dictionaries, when they show the time scepter, at the bottom of the time scepter there is a little sphere. That sphere is called out as the Eye of Harmony for the time scepter in that book. So effectively, that kind of makes the copy of the Eye of Harmony that the TARDIS has lore and canon, because it was produced in that.
Not necessarily, because it could still be a non-localized connection.
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
In Journey to the Center of the TARDIS, they have a map of what's going on inside of the TARDIS.
Yeah.
If you look at the map, the time scepter is actually on its side. To the left in that map, it calls out the Eye of Harmony sphere that's at the bottom of the time scepter. It calls it the Star Chamber.
Is that this illustration that we're looking at now, Adam?
Yes, this is the time scepter. Peter McKinstry.
Remind us which book this was from. It's by the concept artist Peter McKinstry, who's worked in across movies, hasn't he? Like big Hollywood movies. He's a massive Doctor Who fan too, and has worked on the TV show. I think he must have cut his rate considerably to have work for the BBC. But yeah, this is absolutely gorgeous. I can't remember the title of the book this was in though, Adam. Can you?
So this was the visual dictionary, and I believe this was the first edition. It was either the first or second one. It was only one of those 2 books that were released.
So it's called the Time Scepter. Sorry, but what exactly is this a visual representation of that we're looking at?
This is a visual representation of what it looks like inside of the TARDIS dimension. All the rooms, the corridors that you see, that is all of it, hovering around the Time Scepter, which sits at the center of the TARDIS dimension.
Gotcha.
This generates the TARDIS dimension, but it also moves the outer shell through, and it's tied to the time vortex, which is in the center, and that's what this is a visual representation of. What
I
you
love
see,
this. This is so cool.
It's very rare because I did a title sequence of my and Michael Sheen titles, and I have a scene where the TARDIS is traveling through a toroid. It just reminds me so much of that, and I love that. I do. I'm fascinated by the time vortex. You know, I think it's one of the beautiful elements, visual elements of Doctor Who is when you get to see that. And you know, I think all title sequences should have that. You know?
They absolutely should. So this is your blueprint that we're looking at for the Time Scepter, isn't it, Adam? This is on screen now.
correct? Yep.
Do you want to talk us through what decisions you made? Was it all there in the illustration, or had you had to do some of the connecting yourself too?
Well, so what I'm doing here is I'm kind of giving you an idea of what it looks like inside of the control sphere. The problem is that, okay, so it's bigger on the inside, right? But what is the focus, the focal point, the dimensional nexus of the TARDIS is the console room. So as the closer you get to the center at the top of the Time Scepter, the larger the console room gets to you. Everything else becomes periphery because it's bigger on the inside. The control sphere is. So in Peter McKinstry's design, all you see is the console room. It basically fills up the entire center of the sphere. Yeah, I mean that's great, and I could explain that away as the dimensional, perspective as you get closer to the time sphere. I mean the control sphere. The center of it becomes bigger, and it fills up the entire sphere because that's all you see. Once you enter the center of the sphere, you can't see it in McKinstry's drawing, but at the top of the Time Scepter, that is the entire console room from the 9th and 10th Doctor era. What I did was I basically just there's a room below the TARDIS console. It's called the Switch Room. It's always called the Switch Room. It's been called out in novels. So the Switch Room is below. If you look on the right, you have the console room. I've included the Prime computer from those 80s commercials.
Brilliant.
Love it.
Oh, I love that.
I've always loved that idea. It's a backdoor to programming the TARDIS computer mind, is what it is. That's why it's called the Prime computer.
That's a brilliant Easter egg.
Yeah, Prime computer. Funny. Oh, clever Prime.
And all that mist and everything is to keep the computer cool, to keep it running, operating, because it is the back door to the TARDIS mind. The Doctor can go in there and reconfigure. He can upload new software from Gallifrey if he wanted to for different desktop things. Think of the TARDIS as more of a computer than anything else. Like the desktop is where you're at, but everything else is controlled through basically its mathematical design. So it's like you upload a program into a system, and then the matter projectors project that matter out, and that's what changes the inside of the TARDIS instantly.
When you watched Journey to the Center of the TARDIS, there were quite a few interesting rooms in there, like the one with the sort of tree thing with the egg things. Mm-hmm. What did you make of that? Did you incorporate any of that, or was that sort of what was your thoughts on that?
The organic side to it, I suppose, isn't it?
Yeah, and
so
obviously the coral element as well with the tenant.
It's called the Proteon core, or the Proteon room. That's basically where the tree is. Each one of those capsules has a form of living coral. Okay, so this is where the coral aspect comes in. those are like living computer minds, little ones, individual ones, and they sustain each section of the TARDIS.
So it's like a
But
neural network.
kind of, yes, yeah, like a neural network. It generates. So if you take one of those pods out, a section of the TARDIS can effectively just cease to exist. But the fact that it still has energy as they're running around, in Journey to the Center of the TARDIS tells you that it's kind of there, but not quite there. So part of the TARDIS is kind of phasing out as they're
But it's
running
also
around.
trying to stop itself from allowing this part to leave the TARDIS. So it shuts down all routes of escape, doesn't it? It sort of
Correct.
funnels you around, eternally until you either give up and give it back, or
I would say that with the illustrations, with the various pages that I've seen, I know that there is a lot. You've worked up quite a lot. You've taken those core principles that have captivated our imaginations across all of these decades, and the things that are irrefutable about the theory of time and space travel in Doctor Who. There are very few things, but they are there, and you've just had fun with them in that kind of way that Lee's just described, in that kind of organic way, as well as in a mechanical way too. So the idea that there's still like prime computers sat there, and there's rivets and screws and things need a whack with a hammer, and it's all part of the fun. I mean, I think you combine it really effectively in spreads such as this, where we've got the time capsule there, and it's the chronoplasmic shell, the exochronoplasmic shell, and all those old High Gallifreyan glyphs that sort of scattered across the outer shell of it. But it's still, it looks like it's a thing of purpose. And all of the terminology that you use, sort of quantum foam, dimensional dams, and stabilizers, and all of this, and yet it's got that neural feel, that it's a network, that there is something organic about it and something of the natural world about it. And it's very difficult to hit that sweet spot, particularly in the form of blueprints.
Yeah, I mean, it took trying to figure out how to render a dimension that made sense for what the TARDIS is in was difficult, because everybody just called it a magic box. It's bigger on the inside. It just is. But how do you render that? How do you project what a dimension actually looks like? And the only thing that came up to me, and I've been studying physics for the last 14 years on my own.
I was going to ask you about that.
There's a concept that the universe is a giant toroid or torus sphere, and that we're on the skin of it, moving towards the center, that has broken itself away from the Big Bang itself, and it's just a perpetual. It gets larger and larger. It expands. New ones are coming into being constantly, and it's just like a heartbeat, from the center, and it all just kind of dissipates outwards, and then eventually all information transfers into what I would call the perfect universe. Some people, this is my cosmic conception of what everything is, including religious aspects of what heaven would be. It would be the perfect universe. All data from all these universes, including the one we're in, eventually end up in that one giant perfect universe, which from the giant perfect universe, it created the Big Bang. So you've got kind of like a paradox thing. The universe creates itself, heaven, and the consciousness, the vast consciousness that I would consider God.
And what could any race or any civilization create, though, Adam, to travel, to traverse, to navigate all of that? Where would they start?
Well, in order to time travel in this reality, physics-wise, okay, to stay relative to our causal nexus, okay, anytime scientists recently came out with, and they said, if you're going to time travel, you're basically stepping into an alternate Earth, an alternate universe, and it's very slight. So when you time travel, you're not allowed to break the fundamental laws when you're bending space. You're going to end up in an alternate reality, very slight alternate reality. The only way to time travel and affect time in this proper universe would be to have a wormhole that is the size of our universe, that's universal, infinite wormhole. The Time Lords did that. That's what they created, the time vortex, a universal wormhole. They can access it at any time. You drop in. Time is relative across space, right? So you can jump into the wormhole, jump out of the wormhole. The TARDIS also can tunnel and create different paths within that universal wormhole. Think of it as a giant spiral that just spirals out infinitely, goes from the beginning of time to the end of time. So if you drop into that vortex, you can direct yourself, red shift, blue shift. You're coming at us as blue shift, leaving us as red shift.
Which was indicated by Russell T. Davies, really. I think that was introduced in the title sequence, wasn't it? You had red going backwards and blue going forwards.
Correct.
Yeah.
So that's the physics side of it. So in order to be able to affect reality in this universe, you would have to have a universal wormhole that you can, because the universe doesn't rotate, but the vortex does, clockwise, counterclockwise. And if you're taken out of time, you can jump back into time at any point in time. The vortex will take you there, and the wormhole will take you there. So that's what essentially the TARDIS does. It uses a vast wormhole network that's universal. It can jump in and out of time and affect relative time in this universe, not an alternate universe. And what you're seeing right there is, okay, the up at the top.
You just heard 3 people trying to think.
What the well, no, I do not understand physics. I never have.
I'm very, I'm very into physics as well. I have a lot of problems with relativist theory. I tend to think that time travel is not possible. That's another debate for another time. But anyway,
that's okay. I'll make you a believer in time travel. Trust me.
Oh, right. Okay. We'll have a chat later.
Okay. So what came first for you, Adam? An interest in physics or watching Doctor Who and other science fiction? Was it a chicken and egg thing there?
When I was 10 years old, I tried to define what the TARDIS was, and now here, okay.
All of this.
Try to imagine this, guys. Okay. Mm-hmm. In the U.S., you're getting the 3rd Doctor, the 4th Doctor, the 5th Doctor on PBS. That's it, right? We didn't know what the TARDIS was called, okay? So I created the acronym myself for what I thought it was called, which was time and, time, arranging, rearranging, dimensional, interdimensional subsystem.
I think I prefer that one.
I was going by the visuals. I mean, it arranges itself. It can rearrange itself. It's dimensional. It's interdimensional, and then it's a subsystem, which is like a subway system for Time Lords. So at the time, I was 10 years old. This was the only thing I could come up with that made sense for what TARDIS meant.
We're gonna have to give JT. We're gonna have to get JT to do another competition and make that deal.
I'm just thinking how I think you could make sense of absolutely anything. Well, almost anything, Adam. Almost anything.
I mean, but imagine that you guys grew up with knowing that it was time and relative.
Yeah, we did. Yeah.
Until I saw that Hartnell episode, I had no clue. Neither did my friends. None of us did.
And what was your initial reaction when you first heard Susan explain what it was?
I said, "Really? That's what they said."
It always sucks when the thing that your head canon is better than the canon, right? It always,
it was a letdown.
Movies have been good. I thought of better endings than the actual ending they had in the movie.
I mean, I'm interested. All this is absolutely fascinating and dense, and I've no doubt you could talk about it and on it for hours and hours and hours. But I'm also interested by the fact that you fixated on the Time Lords themselves to do all that work on the characters, on the way, not just about the things that they've accomplished, but about the way that they themselves look. And why? I mean, for example, the first appearance here of Omega and the 3 Doctors, with that again quite an organic-looking headdress that reflects the things that the Time Lords themselves also wear in the same story. And yet, when we see him again in the Arc of Infinity, he's wearing something completely different. and you've gone to those two designs and tried to sort of look at them and find ways of sort of incorporating them and expanded them, blew them up and looked at them. So the Omega's got his own seal, just as the Time Lords have their own seals and glyphs and all this sort of level to the mythos. You've kind of brought it all into focus, really, and established a continuity of sorts and have multi-purposed a lot of the visuals, a lot of the visual markers from really, I suppose there are only a handful. How many Time Lord stories were there, Rabbi? 5 or 6?
I don't know. Was it? You had, I guess, War Games, then 3 Doctors. Do you count Terror of the Autons? Because one, that's not a Time Lord. 3 Doctors. Next one would be Deadly Assassin, wouldn't it? Then Invasion of Time, Arc of Infinity, and do you count Trial of the Time Lord?
I think we have to, in light of what Adam had showed us earlier on about the black hole
carrier. Yeah.
So you got, and then in the modern one, it'll be, I don't know, last
End of Time.
The classic. I had them to work out in the modern because you got all those weird ones where he goes to his shed when he was a kid, and well, that's actually some of the stuff I thought was the weakest Capaldi stuff. In fact, you know what? I have to tell you, when that Gallifreyan big spaceship shows up when he's in his childhood home, what was that story? The Capaldi one. I wish they used your designs, Adam. Right? Wouldn't that have been better?
Oh yeah.
I guess we agree.
So, what is it about? What I wanted to ask you though, Adam, was what is it about the Time Lords themselves? Because it's a handful of stories, and people like Russell T Davies are really quite dismissive of the Time Lords. It's all boring guff, and that these characters are largely insignificant. And you could say he's got a point. And yet we do. As the rabbi said, we've all got headcanon about the Time Lords. If it's not about the way they look, it's about the things that they did and why and where.
Well, if you think about the Time Lords, they're not like the Kryptonians. Okay, if we're talking about just in general lore, Kryptonians their bodies have been upgraded to the point where if they get near a yellow sun, they'll be like Superman. You know, the fact that he grew up on Earth and soaked up all that radiation gave him so much power that he's even more powerful than any Kryptonian that would show up on Earth because he's been there for so long. The Time Lords really, what drew me to them was the lore of Rassilon. Okay, the reverence they had for Rassilon in the classic series. I mean, it's almost religious. You know, when the Doctor was being taken in and he was stripped down to a white robe, right? And everybody else was in their fancy robes, and he stripped down to just almost essentially look like a jumper.
Assassin. Yeah.
Yeah, and they're talking about the lore of Rassilon. They have the rod of Rassilon, the crown of Rassilon, the keys of Rassilon. That whole thing, and it tied back, later into the fifth Doctor's, with the tomb of Rassilon. So what got me about Rassilon was the lore. He was an architect. He was an engineer. Brilliant. And this was before the Doctor, right? So he was another Time Lord that you could fixate on rather than the writers trying to push you always to the Doctor and leaving where he came from as a side note. He was one of the prominent ones that you could latch onto and say, there's another cool Time Lord, somebody that I'm interested in, somebody that I want to aspire to be like. And that was one of the things that I loved about him. He invented an entire society and ran it for a while, became discovered, according to the classic lore, not the new Chibnall crap, but the classic lore, he discovered infinite regenerations, and that was an immortality. So he was the one who did that, not
wasn't that through Thremix? Thremix was the one who came up with the regeneration science, and it was Rassilon who stole it from him, I think, wasn't it?
I think he took it in
that before
the novels.
Yeah.
And well, the V factor from the Great Vampires too had something to do with that. Remember, there was like a cult of the vampires, the great vampires, and they thought that some of the regeneration had come from the fact that the great vampires were almost indestructible, because you could hit them with laser weapons and stuff, and they would their skin and tissue would just start to regenerate almost instantly. They couldn't kill them unless they stuck them through the heart with a bolt of steel
on the front of a bow ship. So I'm interested. Now you've mentioned that, the Doctor, certainly in the times that we've seen him, doesn't appear to. I mean, he hero worships Omega. We made very, very clear of that in the Three Doctors, but he doesn't seem to feel the same way about Rassilon, does he?
And no Tecteun either.
Who?
Yeah, I don't know. Sorry, go on.
Well, I was going to say in the Five Doctors, he revered Rassilon.
Respected. He seems frightened, but I don't know.
Respect and fright. Yeah, at the same time, Rassilon was presented as an ultimate power. His mind would reach out and touch other minds, and even fool the Doctor.
Even in death, like because he is an immortal, like, and the fact he came back in the new series, I think really sort of he transcends, being mortal in any sense. And he is an awe-inspiring figure, and I think it's quite interesting how Time Lords sort of changed over the years. If you look at the introduction of them in the 60s, from Terrence Dicks and Malcolm Hulke to what they did to the Time Lords in the 80s, they changed them from an austere, mythological, aloof society into this sort of corrupt and corrupting influence and very officious, so we don't really know from sort of era to era what kind of Time Lord society we're going to get. I started an idea for a story in my head, focusing around the final incarnation of the Doctor and him coming across the real Time Lords, and that the Time Lords that we've seen on TV were actually a cargo cult that they discovered. The Shibogans found the technology left behind by the Time Lords, who had evolved so far that they had actually ceased to be sort of corporeal beings. And that's because I wanted to think of ways of where you can sort of make the Time Lords.
Well, that does sort of fit, particularly with the Time Lords that we do meet in the war games, because they seem bureaucratic, but they also seem ecclesiastical as well. Right.
Yeah, they have that like church-like quality, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Like I don't think not vicars, but when you go to like some place like a monastery, like they have that monastic quality. That's what I was looking for.
Yeah, very much so. Which I kind of think is a shame, because the Time Lords being this sort of pernickety and facetious almost in their activities, and very very aloof and corrupt. It just seems very human to me, and I don't think that that's really what they're about. So I think in the 80s they kind of messed with that a bit too much, and I think that really started with as much as I love The Deadly Assassin, that's really where you sort of started to see Gallifreyan society being too much like Earth society. And I think if you're going to be that advanced, you're not going to be as susceptible to things that we relate to. I think they should always be somewhat unrelatable in terms of being so far removed from what we are that they can't possibly connect with us, or they see us as ants, And I think that's a wasted opportunity, really, for the Time Lords. I think when you look at Rassilon and Omega, I think that's what most of those should be. And that's why I kind of went along this idea of making them not the original Time Lords, but more like, a cargo cult, where you see like tribes in far-flung islands who, during the Second World War, people arrive in planes during the war and leave cargo things, with and they would build like planes and things out of wood and waiting for the gods to come back. So that's kind of where I was taking my idea, which
Well, you do get the impression when we spend more time with Rassilon on screen in the End of Time, and particularly in Hellbent later in the Capaldi years, you see he's a different version of the same character. He's like he's completely crestfallen in many respects and clinging on to his own idea.
It's Timothy Dalton. They wanted Timothy Dalton back. That was really what happened. That they couldn't get him. They're like, just recast him. And Lee, I just want to touch on your point about the changing nature of Gallifrey. Robert Holmes wanted to do a pastiche on the Manchurian Candidate. That's how the Deadly Assassin happened.
No, I get that. I love that. I do love that. Yeah. I just think I think that is something that you can definitely. I know I love the Deadly Assassin. I just think, in a way, they sort of. I think more after the Deadly Assassin rather than that particular story. But I think if you look at Trial of a Time Lord and things like that, and it does seem to me that they sort of become a bit of a joke, you know. And I think in the modern eras, particularly under Capaldi's. Well,
supposedly with Tom Baker's Doctor being that student rebellious, if he's not rebelling against something that is seen to be ridiculous, then.
Yeah, I see what you mean, but I think as well you could do that with any sort of powerful entity. You know, it doesn't necessarily have to become comical in order to
no, I agree with you completely. Yeah, it was. I think it was probably Douglas Adams' sensibilities, and I think Graham Williams to a lesser extent that sort of seized that. So I'm just looking at this picture we've got on screen, and I think, Adam, this is something that you'll appreciate. We've got a picture here of Rassilon up on screen, and I'm looking at the doors behind him. How they remind me of the interior doors from the Paul McGann TV movie TARDIS.
They do. They do. It almost looks like they repurposed it.
I've never noticed that before. But then again, I haven't watched this story for years.
Here's something that I don't know if many of you guys realize, but the Rassilon from the New Who era, from the End of Time and after, is not the same Rassilon from the classic era. So
really? Dun, dun. So I'd assumed it was. So go on, sell us on this one then, mate.
Well, it was either an audio or a book. I think it was both, a little bit of both. But the Rassilon that's in the tower, the Dark Tower, is still there, effectively, because he's immortal. He's in stasis. He's not completely dead. You can't kill him. He's immortal. He keeps regenerating. So he's stuck there in the tower. The Rassilon that appears later at the Time War, they took the body of another Time Lord who sacrificed himself to take the mind of Rassilon out of the Matrix.
Oh, I see.
And put him.
That was in one of the Gallifrey stories. Big Finish. They had a direct descendant of Rassilon, and then they re-imprinted Rassilon's Matrix on him because he had a genetic connection. And that's how they brought it back. Yeah, I forgot about that. That's correct. You are. Yeah, I totally forgot that was the case.
Yeah. So effectively, the Rassilon we see in the End of Time, in Hellbent, and subsequent after that, is not the original Rassilon, who's still in stasis in what I call the Dark Tower as his TARDIS, which has been his foundry. Okay, has been reformatted to be the Dark Tower. But it is actually his foundry, which is probably the most advanced TARDIS on Gallifrey, even though it's older than all of them, which is what I think the Dark Tower is. It's been converted to his tomb for the game, because it's like what they said in what was it, Day of the Doctor or Night of the Doctor, Name of the Doctor. Where else would you bury a Time Lord than in his TARDIS?
Yeah, I love that. I absolutely agree with that. I think that's it makes sense to me.
And that's why there's not that swirly energy running around, because Rassilon isn't truly dead. He's still in stasis on his altar, sitting in his own TARDIS in the center of the death zone.
I love this idea. I'd love to do an even deeper dive on this stuff with you. But it strikes me, talking to you about this subject, Adam, that there's nothing, particularly with your revelation about the Prime Computers advert, there's probably nothing that you can't channel into either headcanon or to line up with this work that you've been putting together. I mean, I've been thinking back across the various incarnations of Doctor Who in other media, and even in such things as the Cross and Blackwell TARDIS here from Doctor Who history. Little things like this. I would imagine that you've got a file on all of these little oddities from things that aren't necessarily canon, but that are fun visual markers and ideas that are going to stitch in somewhere along the line.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like this, you could say is a version of a desktop theme that the fourth Doctor was playing around with.
And there's glyphs. We have glyphs.
Baked beans.
All scattered around it. Yeah, I'd buy that. I'd buy that. So what I was wondering was, we've heard about how you approach the subjects and where the project came from with you, but what do you see as being the end result, the final goal for your project? Are there any things that you leave out that you view as either just too ridiculous as a heresy, or as a heresy, or just not remotely interesting, or whatever? Naming no names.
Well, okay, so the end result is going to be a massive fan publication, print on demand, schematic book for the TARDIS, the Mark I. Okay, not the Mark III that the Doctor's flying around in now, which will get supplements too. You'll have a supplement 2 for the Mark II upgrade for the Transpower system, because all you're doing is you're upgrading the Transpower system. The TARDIS itself remains the same. Everything else in it remains the same. The dimension, the rooms, all that. All you're doing is upgrading the drive system, and you're upgrading the desktop themes and some of the technology. That's it. And you can only go up to a certain type, certain mark number before you have to get a new type of TARDIS, because the type would be too old. It'd be like putting in a Maserati engine into a 1930s, sedan. I mean, it's not going to work. But there are certain upgrades up into, like, say, the 1950s that would work on that 1930s sedan. So that's the approach I'm taking towards the Type 40. The next book would be released. It would be the Time Lord Compendium, which would be just about everything in lore, technology-wise, costumes, gadgets, anything you've seen in the classic era to the new era would be imprinted in the Time Lord Compendium as basically a black and white version of that 1970s Starfleet technical manual. The Time Lord Handbook will be about 3 volumes, and it will be all the notable Time Lords that we've seen on screen, females and males. Will I include the 13th Doctor? Will I include
No!
There are going to be fans of that. We have to acknowledge one thing. There will be fans.
No. I really don't think we do. No, really. Oh,
okay. We were talking earlier on about how things have stagnated visually in this era, though.
And then we'll forget about them.
There's a visceral reaction there.
It really was. I was like,
yeah. And don't forget top trump cards, 10%. Top trump cards, because I think trading cards. Making this an interactive game in the old format of top trump cards would be, and I think the BBC are missing a trick here by not hiring you to produce some really fundamental.
In fact, you know what?
Fun stuff.
Print one up, send it to Bad Wolf as fan mail to Russell T Davies.
Yeah,
you might end up getting a job out of it.
I think he would be very receptive to the idea.
Yeah, I really do.
But then I was doing Topps Trump cards just based on Time Lords themselves, not.
Yeah.
But then I added in I threw in Davros. So.
Well, you got to have villains. You got to have the villains. You got to have the monsters. You got to have the technology as well. So you'd have a card for the staff of Rassilon. You'd have Dalek. You'd have a TARDIS, a Type 1, a Type 2, etc., etc. I mean, you can have all sorts of things, and then you have all the different powers and all the You can keep expanding it and expanding it until. And it's endless. You've got so much material there from the lore to delve into, from the TV show and from Big Finish and all the books and comics, and you just expand it and keep making expansion packs until people got them all.
Because
Got to
he
catch
never
them all.
I do
never
like that
stops.
Rassilon. Say that.
Richard
Is that-
Armitage playing Rassilon for Big Finish at the moment.
Oh yeah, yeah. I love Richard Armitage's Rassilon. I think he's fantastic. I'm a big fan. Big fan. I think if you couldn't get Timothy Dalton, he was a great choice for that. I mean, it looks the part, you know. But I will say this: if you guys notice the Rassilon the Vanquisher, I kind of modeled his look on Russell Crowe.
Oh, I did wonder about that. But yeah, I was looking at your, I suppose chronologically speaking, your latest take on Rassilon as the cyber president, and I was surprised that you'd kind of embraced the more ridiculous notions in more recent episodes. But I kind of admired the spirit of that, and yeah, I did wonder about that.
Well, oddly enough, that came from the comic book from Titan, Supremacy of the Cybermen, which came out way before the Time Lord, what you see with the Chibnall era. This was as a sequel to Hellbent, where the Cybermen were still alive at the end of the universe, where Gallifrey had been moved. Rassilon gets, exiled, runs into them, comes back, regenerates the universe, but redeems himself. And the Doctor realizes that Rassilon isn't evil and that actually has good qualities. And then there's a method to a lot of his madness. It was a good story because it really redeemed the Rassilon that we saw in Hellbent and made him a likable character again.
So it seems like most things are on your radar, and you decide what you can work with, what's fun to use visually, as well as the stories that sort of sit well with you, like whatever Big Finish you're doing, or whatever's going on in expanded media anywhere, really.
There's no structure. It's utter chaos. It's whatever I feel at the time that I want to do.
That's what makes it so great, right? I'm really genuinely, that's what makes it so great. It's just in the same way. Look, I mean, it doesn't make sense that all of a sudden the time was changed from 3 Doctors to Deadly Assassin. Like, it doesn't make any, like, you have to like work in it to fit it all together. It was just Robert Holmes wanted to do something different, and that's what I like, just things happening as on the fly.
Robert Holmes, is that an amalgamation then?
What? Okay. Yeah. Before anybody has to go, I really want to just put out there the concept for the Great Curator comic that I'm working on.
Okay.
I really want to explain, because you guys are this is an exclusive, okay? It's not a spoiler on what the comic is okay, I'm gonna give you a synopsis, but I'm gonna paint a picture. If we can go back to that one shot of the black hole carrier with the bow ships, I want to explain something, because this is something that's never been in this comic. I am trying to depict. Okay, so the first part of the story is going to open up with, you're going to see the Time Lords battling a great vampire. Okay, and oddly enough, it's something out of Star Wars, and like so a black hole carrier enters into a system. Okay, there are aliens in that system that have their own ships, their own warships. They are under the influence, have been corrupted by a great vampire, which is in space hovering above a planet. This thing is massive. And there are fleets of alien ships with vampires who are piloting them. The bow ship, the black hole carrier, enters the area. It sends out its bow ships to go and strategically attack the vampire itself. The black hole carrier then attacks all of the alien ships that are trying to defend this, space vampire. When the black hole carrier fires time torpedoes at it, it envelops it in like a temporal. Everything slows down. It's like a sphere, and then they just fire shots into the sphere, and slowly the ship starts to break apart and explode within that. And then once time regains, that ship is destroyed. So this is how they take them out. That is how Time Lords battle. They don't even give you a chance to attack.
They're
So
localized and removed effectively.
right. The bow ships, as they go after the great vampire, in the front of the bow ships, you see those ovals to the side of the cone, just above the steel bolt that they're carrying. Those are high powered energy weapons. They don't do a thing really, except for they can knock off skin, and the great vampire starts to regenerate as soon as it's hit. What they do is you have specific ships that shoot bolts into, and they almost crucify the vampire. So here we are going back to a biblical representation, something that was always within the Time Lords. If you go from the robes, the just as Rabbi was saying, from the war games. So anyways, they basically will fire these bolts, and they will go through the arms of the vampire and the shins, like they're crucifying him, and they pull back and they hold the arms outwards so that the vampire's legs and arms are stretched out, so that the guy that comes in for the kill shot on the heart has a proper place to do that, because the vampire can swing its arms in space. It's got its wings. It can just damage ships. These bow ships are designed specifically to shoot that bolt into the center of it. What happens in the story is that when they fired the bolts at the arms and the legs, there are dark star chains that are linked to the black hole carrier itself via dimensional doorway. So the black hole carrier itself is actually holding this great vampire in place with its power, while the bow ships have shot their bolts into it with chains running back to the bow ship, which actually runs back to the black hole carrier dimensionally. Okay. The black hole carrier then uses all of its power to hold that great vampire in place, while the bow ships, while the center one goes in for the kill. The problem is in this situation, a core from one of the ships, the alien ships, ends up just as they're firing that bolt, and this bow ship disappears. The vampire disappears. The rest of the crew think that they've done their job, but they lost the bow ship crew, and they end up going to the next system to fight more vampires. Okay, more great vampires. They leave this system. This system happens to be the system that the Whifferdills are from, which explains why they're scattered and why there's only a few of them in the universe. And the fifth Doctor sixth Doctor had run into one of them, Frobisher. So this kind of is a backstory.
For the people out there who don't know, the Whifferdrills are shape-changing aliens.
I love Frobisher.
Love Frobisher. He was fantastic. I wish they would have done him in the new series as a CGI.
I think they should do. I don't see any reason.
For the 60th.
Yeah,
a penguin, a talking penguin. I mean, how fantastic would that be? So my idea was basically to come up with Frax, who is a female of Whifferdill, who looks like he's like Frobisher, but takes the form of a little furry. The Doctor. Okay, so that's the first part of the story. The second part of the story is you pick up with the Doctor in the Death Zone, just after the events of the 5 Doctors. He snags the Rassilon warrior robot. It gets damaged, but at the time it gets damaged, K9 gets damaged as well. This is the Curator Doctor, by the way. This is what he did. He went to Gallifrey. He wanted to steal that Rassilon warrior robot. He has a K9 Mark IV or Mark V with him. It gets damaged. He decides to put the two together and recreates the Rassilon warrior robot and calls it Butler. Because he's advanced in age, the Doctor wants somebody to protect him. K9 is a little outdated. So he takes the Rassilon warrior robot and combines it with the mind of K9 and creates this character called the Butler.
Brilliant.
And the Butler is his guard, basically.
I love it. And so do you have a picture of the cover of the Great Curator?
Dan, you have that?
I don't. No, I don't.
I can.
I think
if you go to my website.
Yeah, you need to show that.
If it's on your social medias, then I haven't seen that. But if it's on your social medias, by all means, send us a link and we'll pop it in the description of the video and the show notes and all the rest of it. And people can go and look it up, and they can go and connect with you on Twitter and Instagram. Are you across both of those?
I'm on Twitter, but I'm not on Instagram. I've never got into the insties.
You've got your DeviantArt page, don't you, as well?
I do. That was where I
But,
would say is the best place. I just put it in the private chat.
DeviantArt, yeah. So any of those places, I'll make sure that all the links are available for you guys. They'll be in the description of the video. But go and find Atom Mirabilis. Did I say that correctly that time? Over on
Correct.
Twitter too. Go and follow Adam and his work and see more of all of these projects as they're taking shape. Have you got an end date in mind for the coming together of the first of these books, Adam?
Oh no.
It'll happen when it happens.
We've been working on the TARDIS master schematics for 14 years. Me and Bill Swift have going back and forth. But it took us a long time to figure it out. And now that we're at a point where we think we figured out the science behind it, I think it's going to move a lot faster. It was trying to relate the technobabble that was in the series to actual physics. And then how do you relate that to something that somebody's going to understand? Star Trek has its own technobabble, but a lot of Star Trek's technobabble is actually rooted in physics. So if you take, it's just like English words from America versus England. The one word is the same here, but it's used as a different word, but it means the same thing. So it was kind of trying to figure out that from the technobabble from Doctor Who and Star Trek, and to make it seem, how do you marry that with physics? And I will say one thing. If anybody wants to know what Time Lord science is on how to create a TARDIS, watch the Star Trek The Next Generation episode, Remember Me, with Dr. Crusher. They create a warp bubble. She ends up in a universe totally invented by her mind to rationalize, where she's on the ship, but people keep disappearing. She doesn't realize that she's in a collapsing warp bubble universe of itself. The Time Lords took that accident from that. You can't conflate the two because they're two separate universes. But if you take that technology from Star Trek The Next Generation and you develop that as a science called warp matrix engineering, which is what's in the TARDIS handbook, the little tiny one, that explains how the Time Lords created the dimension that the TARDIS exists in. And it's a torus form.
Yeah, that's clever.
I like that. Further reading and from across the fictional universes. I absolutely love it. So, yeah, get in touch with Adam on social media. Go and find his DeviantArt. We'll make sure that the links to that are in the description. Because you do, obviously, you're steadily working your way through this, but this isn't your day job, is it? So you do it when you can. You work together with the other guy on the project. I can't remember. Was it Richard?
Oh, no, it's William Swift.
William
Fantastic
Swift.
writer.
Sorry, William. So you collaborate and confer with William when you can, and gradually the project inches its way to some sort of publication, whether it's ideally, I think we'd love to see these in print, wouldn't we?
Oh, yes.
Print. But yeah, be on your coffee table there, Lee. Imagine the straining. You have to go and get another coffee table or two, maybe. But by the time that Adam is finished working his way through all of this, but yeah, these are. I mean, all of the pictures are very, very pretty, and these covers are simply
Gorgeous.
Majestic. Yeah, gorgeous.
Seems to be the
perfect.
word.
Yeah, it is. It's captivating. And when you started to put these in, well, when it sounds like you've been working on it for a very long time, but when the images started to appear, it was very clear that you're somebody with clearly a very intelligent man. And all this physics stuff has slightly blown my mind, but obviously a very creative man too, somebody who loves the Doctor Who universe, loves his Doctor Who, in which case we are more than happy to make your acquaintance, sir, and thank you for spending your time with us on Type 40, this time sort of opening the pages really, and allowing us to see your process and to get some idea of where it's come from and where it's going to. We're also in the presence of two other artists, Adam. And we always have a pretty pictures section at the end of every Type 40 show that clocks up this kind of length. So I thought we'd just head over to our mate Lee there, problem being, who can tell us a little bit about his art here. I just think this is wonderful stuff. So this is something that you've been experimenting with a little lately, isn't it?
Yeah, it was really strange. I just felt compelled to do some digital art collage stuff. I don't know. It was just after the death of the artist from the Target books passed away.
Chris Achilles.
Chris Achilles. Sorry, yeah, my brain farted there. But no, actually, I mean, I started like literally the day after that happened, and I was just like, well, that was weird, because I definitely had sort of inspiration from that style, and so I just did originally like one. I started with the Robots of Death, and then I decided to do more, and this was the fourth one. This is the obviously the City of Death. And I was just trawling through as many images on Google that I could find that weren't too sort of blurry or this was all done on an app basically, and it was just collaging it and using PNGs and effects and lighting and coloring and trying to sort of keep it in the sort of 70s sort of vein as well.
Having spoken to Chris and got to know him a little in the last couple of years of his life, I think no matter how you get to that end result, I think that's a method that Chris would have absolutely have approved of. And yeah, I really like it. I mean, I know they're evolving, as is every artistic sort of practice. The more you do it, the better they get. That's how it's going with those, isn't it? So I can't wait to see where you are with.
I'm going to do more. At the moment, I've done 4 Tom ones, 4 great stories: City of Death, Robots of Death. What else did I do? Pyramids of Mars, and what was the other one I did? God, Struth, my brain.
I saw it the other day, and I can't remember either.
I'm telling you, my memory is not
as a host.
The other one I did. Sorry, I'm just scrolling through.
More Tom Baker gold.
It was because obviously he's my man. He's my main dude. He's my doctor.
Also, it fits within the bracket of the kind of thing you're talking about and what you're trying to evoke, doesn't it? So yeah. Where can people see all of those? You mostly on Twitter, or have you got?
Yeah, it's on Twitter. I haven't really. The other one was Genesis of Daleks. I couldn't forget that, for crying out loud. It's embarrassing. Yeah, I mean it's on Twitter. I don't know how you'll find it particularly. I might do a repost of them, and I'll be doing some more at some point as well.
That's it. Good stuff. And Rabbi, your amazing Ice Warriors comics, they're back. They're available again, aren't they? How can people sample these wonderful comic strips again?
That's you sign up to my Substack. It goes out my Substack each week. I guess that's the best way.
I love the colorization of these, because I saw the black and white ones when you first showed them. These are great.
I do the colors. Stefano Cardoselli did the art. I colored it. We just finished. Was it the second story today? But again, just sign up my Substack if you want. I'll just send you the back issues. There's no problem.
Nice,
fantastic stuff. And yes, so remind us of your social media accounts, Adam. Where can people see more of your work and keep track of you?
So probably the easiest way to get a hold of me is through Twitter, at Atom Mirabilis on Twitter. You can actually find me on DeviantArt, Time Lord Rassilon on DeviantArt. If you Google that, it'll take you right to my page. You can also find my comic book art, which is superhero related, with my own universe. Most of the characters have been copyrighted, and that is Capital Comics Studios on DeviantArt. And then that's pretty much it. Well, I do have an old account at Skywarp-2 on DeviantArt. If you want to see all of my old art from the 2008 to 2012 era.
Fascinating.
I will say that a lot of my old art is on Trek BBS, and I was actually featured in an IO9 article when I first did what I thought what the TARDIS looked like. They had a big picture of it on there.
Well, in between now, when we're recording this and when this video goes out, get me some more of those links. We'll put as much of it in the description of the video as we possibly can, and people can feast their eyes, knock themselves out, and warp their vision with the physics of it all. Get a closer look at some of the things that we've shown you on this video, on this extra chunk of Type 40 this time. If you've enjoyed this, if you've been able to wrap your head around it or not, you've probably enjoyed the experience just like I have, and this very, 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 very small brain that I've got. It's not dimensionally transcendental at all. It's very, very small. please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell, hit the cluster bell, so you get the notifications about what we're going to be doing next, whether we're going to be live or dropping a video or whatever else, or a podcast, wherever and however. Like the video and subscribe to the channel if you would. Gentlemen, thanks for your company this time. Adam, I'm going to keep watching these projects come together. I do hope to invite you back at some point in the future. No matter how much or how little you've managed to get done in the meantime, I think we've barely scratched the surface, really, of the kind of things that you could tell us about Time Lord mythology and expanded media and all that. But yeah, I think my brain needs a rest, and maybe so does my mouth.
Oh, God, mine too.
Thanks for your company, everybody, and I'll be speaking to the rest of you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.